Do you always think you're doing things right by following established patterns? What if the most obvious path is actually a trap? There's a belief ingrained in each of us. Do what everyone else does, and you won't go wrong. But what if this very belief is your biggest mistake, hindering you from achieving true success? You make this mistake every day, unknowingly letting it steal your opportunities. Forget everything you've been taught. Perhaps what you considered immutable rules are actually just limiting your potential. Today, we'll share a story that will make you rethink your perceptions of strategy and success. You'll discover how one person, by challenging conventional methods, managed to change the course of events. Stay with us and watch until the end. We'd be especially grateful for a like and a subscription. And of course, let us know in the comments where you're watching this video from. September 28th, 1944, NBIS Island, Palau. Japanese forces seemed to have anticipated everything. Major General Hoshi Imamura had transformed the narrow causeway into a perfect killing zone. Mortars were zeroed in with meter-level precision. Machine guns created overlapping fields of fire, and artillery coordinates were meticulously calculated. 470 defenders lay concealed behind reinforced concrete, closely watching the only path American Marines could take. Every military manual preached the same doctrine. Amphibious landings follow the path of least resistance. Land on the beach closest to the objective. Choose the obvious route. For 3 years of island warfare, the Japanese had thoroughly studied Marine tactics. They knew exactly where Colonel Bucky Harris and his 3rd Battalion would land. They could practically set their watches by it. As dawn broke over the Pacific, Japanese gunners peered through their sights, aimed at the empty causeway, fingers resting on triggers, anticipating the inevitable attack into their perfectly laid trap. The killing zone was ideal. The timing was impeccable. The Marines were nowhere to be found. Instead, the sound of naval artillery came from an entirely different direction. Harris had thrown out all the rules and struck from the rear. The morning sun cast long shadows over NBIS Island as Colonel William Bucky Harris surveyed the terrain through his binoculars. From his vantage point aboard the command ship, the narrow causeway connecting the small coral atoll to the northern tip of Peleliu looked exactly what it was: a death trap. The Japanese had spent weeks preparing their welcome for the 3rd Battalion, 5th Marine Regiment. Harris could see every meticulously placed gun emplacement, every mortar pit, every machine gun nest that Major General Hoshi Imamura's forces had carved into the coral and concrete. Intelligence reports, spread out on a makeshift table, told the story in stark numbers. 470 Japanese defenders had turned NBIS into a fortress, specifically designed to annihilate Marines attempting the obvious approach. The causeway was barely 45 meters wide at low tide, a perfect funnel that would compress his battalion into a killing field, where overlapping fields of fire would mow down his men like wheat before a scythe. Every artillery piece on the island was zeroed in on that narrow strip of coral and sand. The Japanese had done their homework. Harris lowered his binoculars and turned to Captain Walter Stout, whose weathered face mirrored the same grim assessment. "They're expecting us to come straight across that causeway," Harris said, his voice carrying the flat certainty of a man who had seen too many predictable attacks end in disaster. "Every gun on this island is aimed at the most obvious landing zone. Stout nodded, examining the aerial photographs that revealed the intricate defensive network. Standard doctrine says we land on the nearest beach and advance to the objective. That causeway is the shortest route to the island. He paused, tracing the narrow strip with his finger. It's also suicide. Stay with us and watch until the end. We'd be especially grateful for a like and a subscription. And of course, let us know in the comments where you're watching this video from. Preparations continued with mechanical precision all around them. LVT landing craft bobbed on the morning waves, their crews conducting final checks of engines and weapons. The battleships USS Iowa and USS New Jersey had already begun their preliminary bombardment, their 16-inch shells roaring over the water, shelling the obvious landing zones. F-4U Corsairs circled overhead, awaiting the signal to dive on their assigned targets. Everything was proceeding according to the standard doctrine of amphibious operations that had guided the Marines across the Pacific. But Harris had spent 3 years watching Marines die following that same doctrine on Guadalcanal, Tarawa, and Saipan. He had seen what happened when American forces did exactly what the Japanese expected them to do. The enemy had studied Marine tactics with the same meticulous attention as everything else, and they had learned to prepare their defenses accordingly. The obvious approach was always the most heavily defended. Sergeant John Red McCauley approached the command group, his squad leaders following behind him. The veteran NCO's eyes held the same skeptical look Harris had come to recognize in Marines who had survived enough amphibious landings to develop an instinct for trouble. "Colonel, the men are asking about the landing plan," McCauley said. "They see those gun positions just as well as we do." Harris turned away from the causeway and looked southeast, where the open ocean stretched to the horizon. The seaward side of Nesebus presented an entirely different tactical picture. The beaches were narrower, more exposed to waves, and farther from the obvious objective, but they were also virtually undefended. Reconnaissance photos showed only scattered observation posts and light gun positions along the southeastern shore. The Japanese had concentrated their forces where they expected the attack. "We're not going across the causeway," Harris announced, his decision crystallizing as he spoke. The assembled officers exchanged glances, recognizing the moment their commander was about to rewrite the tactical playbook. "We're hitting them from the sea." The audacity of the plan immediately struck them. An open ocean-to-shore amphibious operation would require the Marines to traverse nearly 3 kilometers in unprotected landing craft, battling surf and waves that could swamp their vehicles or disrupt their formation. They would be attacking by a circuitous route, forsaking the advantages of surprise and concentrated firepower that a direct approach offered. But it would also put them where the Japanese least expected them. While Imamura's forces waited in their perfectly prepared killing zone, Harris's Marines would be landing on beaches that had been deliberately left weak because no rational commander would choose such a challenging approach. Imagine making the same mistake for years without realizing it. You thought you were following the rules, but in reality you were just playing someone else's game. Have you ever felt your efforts were wasted because you were playing by someone else's rules? Today we'll tell a story that will redefine your understanding of strategy and success, showing how the most illogical move can lead to a stunning victory. Forget everything you've been taught about the right path to triumph. Sometimes the truth lies where you least expect it. So, it's 1944, the Pacific Ocean. American Marines faced the task of assaulting NBIS Island, and every traditional approach to the operation seemed doomed. Lieutenant Stout carefully studied the southeastern coast through his binoculars, meticulously measuring distances and calculating possible angles of attack. "The surf looks manageable enough," he muttered, assessing the situation. However, Major Harris, his gaze fixed on the same stretch of land, quickly interrupted his thoughts. "But we'll be completely exposed during the landing if they detect us too early and retarget their guns." To which Harris confidently countered, "Their heavy weaponry is positioned to cover only the causeway. It will take them hours to redeploy, and by then we'll already be ashore." He pointed to the seemingly weakly defended beaches. "Intelligence data shows about 50 men covering 2 miles of coastline. We can break through there and outflank their positions while they're waiting for us on the causeway. Stay with us and watch until the end, as we'd be especially grateful for a like and a subscription. And of course, don't forget to tell us in the comments where you're watching us from." As the meaning of his audacious plan became clear, a slow grin spread across Macaulay's weathered face. "They'll be looking the wrong way when we hit the beach," he said. "Exactly," Harris confirmed. "While they're watching an empty causeway, we'll be coming in through their back door." He turned to his staff officers, the decision now final. "Transmit the signal to the fleet. We're changing the landing plan. Naval gunfire will shift to the southeastern beaches. Air support will focus on inland positions. And get me the battalion commanders. We're going to show the Japanese what happens when you prepare for the last war, not this one." Word spread quickly throughout the flotilla, communicated by signal flags and radio transmissions, that would completely alter the course of the morning's battle before the first Marine even set foot on the island. The first LVT amphibious landing vehicles began their journey through the morning waves at 06:30, their tracks churning through water that shifted from deep blue to lighter shades, signaling their approach to NBIS Island. Harris was in the lead vehicle with Stout's company, watching the southeastern beaches grow larger through the spray-streaked windshield. Behind them, 23 more tracked vehicles carried the assault waves of the 3rd Battalion, their engines straining against the Pacific swells that threatened to scatter the formation. The naval bombardment shifted precisely as Harris had ordered. Instead of shelling the obvious landing zones near the causeway, the 16-inch guns of the battleships USS Iowa and USS New Jersey methodically sent their shells into the island's interior, targeting command bunkers and supply depots that intelligence had identified through aerial photography. The sound of heavy guns from this angle was different. Flashes from their muzzles were visible on the horizon as each salvo roared overhead to explode among the coral ridges, where Major General Imamura had positioned his reserves. From his post in the Japanese command bunker overlooking the causeway, Private First Class Tatsuji Isida glued his eye to the periscope, scanning the approaches in anticipation of the presumed American advance. The morning bombardment intensified, but the shells were falling in the wrong places, striking areas with no strategic value for an attack across the narrow land bridge. Perhaps the American artillerymen were just ranging their shots, or perhaps their intelligence was flawed. In any case, Isida and his comrades remained focused on the killing zone they had prepared for weeks. Machine gun nests carved into the coral provided perfect fields of fire. Mortar positions were zeroed into the meter. Every approach across the causeway was planned, measured, and registered for indirect fire support. When the Marines rushed across that narrow strip of land, they would be caught in a crossfire of automatic weapons that would mow them down before they advanced 50 yards. The plan was flawless. That's why you should stay with us and watch this story until the very end. We'd be especially grateful for every like and subscription. And of course, we're waiting to hear in the comments where you're watching our video from. 2 miles away, the first wave of LVT amphibians landed on the southeastern beaches of NBIS Island. The resistance was exactly as Harris had predicted. Scattered rifle fire from observation posts manned by soldiers tasked with watching for diversions, not repelling a major assault. Sergeant McCauley's squad landed on the beach in the third vehicle, their boots splashing through the shallows onto coral sand that crunched under the weight of their gear. Japanese positions along this stretch of coast consisted primarily of camouflage trenches and a few concrete observation bunkers, built to spot approaching fleets rather than to engage landing forces. The defenders had light weaponry, rifles, a few machine guns, and mortars, but nothing resembling the concentrated firepower awaiting along the causeway. They fought with the desperate courage of soldiers who knew they were vastly outnumbered, but their resistance quickly crumbled under the onslaught of a full-scale Marine battalion assault. Stout's company advanced inland with mechanical precision, using flamethrowers to clear bunkers and demolition charges to destroy observation posts. Each fallen position created breaches in the Japanese defensive line, allowing more Marines to break through and secure ground that Imamura's forces had never seriously intended to defend. The southeastern beaches represented a calculated risk in the Japanese defensive plan, too difficult to attack to warrant heavy fortifications, yet close enough to the main positions to be reinforced if necessary. But there was no time for reinforcements. By Oro Sevenao, Harris already had 3 companies ashore, pushing inland, moving through coconut groves and coral formations that provided natural cover from the heavy weaponry positioned to defend the causeway. Complete surprise had been achieved. Have you ever felt a meticulously constructed world crumble in an instant, with a threat materializing where it couldn't possibly exist? Imagine this. You prepare for months for a battle, expecting a frontal assault, only for the enemy to suddenly appear behind you, attacking from within. This is precisely the incredible story that unfolded on NBIS Island. Today, we'll reveal how American Marines pulled off the impossible, turning a perfect defensive trap into a deadly snare for its creators. Forget everything you've been taught about classic amphibious operations. Here, the rules were rewritten. Stay with us and watch until the end. We'd be especially grateful for a like and a subscription. And, of course, don't forget to tell us in the comments where you're watching from. Japanese radio intercepts that morning were practically screaming with panic as commanders tried to make sense of what was happening. U.S. naval artillery was pounding their rear areas while forward positions remained untouched. What did it mean? The first Japanese counterattack was launched by a reserve company located in the very center of the island. Private Isida, his rifle slipping in sweaty hands, ran through unfamiliar terrain, gripped by mounting terror. Reality struck them with deafening clarity. The Americans were not crossing the causeway at all. They were already ashore, already infiltrating positions thought to be impregnable, already threatening the meticulously prepared defensive network from a flank no one had ever planned to cover. Fighting inland was brutal but swift. Japanese soldiers, trained for static defense, found themselves drawn into dynamic combat against Marines who had honed their tactics over 3 years of island warfare. Individual acts of heroism proved powerless in the face of tactical surprise and numerical superiority. Pillboxes designed to fire seaward became vulnerable to attacks from their blind sides. Machine gun nests oriented toward the causeway couldn't pivot fast enough to engage targets approaching from the jungle. Stay with us until the very end to learn all the details of this incredible story. We'd be especially grateful for a like and a subscription, and please let us know in the comments which city or country you're watching us from. Macaulay's squad encountered the fiercest resistance at the communications bunker, the heart of the Japanese defense, housing the radio equipment connecting the island to main command on Peleliu. This bunker was skillfully integrated into a coral ridge, providing excellent fields of fire towards the obvious landing zones. However, its rear entrance was guarded by only a few riflemen who expected to meet desperate survivors from a frontal assault, not fresh Marines advancing through concealed terrain. A flamethrower team pushed forward under covering fire, their weapons hissing as streams of jellied gasoline penetrated the bunker's embrasures. The explosion, as the position's internal fuel tanks ignited, was heard halfway across the island, sending a column of black smoke into the morning sky. With the destruction of this communication center, Japanese units throughout Nisibus lost contact with their headquarters and each other, transforming a once coordinated defense into scattered pockets of resistance. By Oslo 830, Harris had achieved what traditional amphibious assault doctrine considered impossible. His Marines had established a secure beachhead without heavy casualties, advanced inland with minimal resistance, and seized key terrain dominating the approaches to the main Japanese positions. The ideal killing zone, meticulously prepared by Imamura, still waited along the causeway, its guns aimed at empty water, while American forces consolidated their hold on ground that was supposed to be impregnable. The tactical situation had shifted dramatically in less than 2 hours. Instead of assaulting prepared positions from the most difficult direction, the Marines now occupied commanding heights and could methodically dismantle the Japanese defenses from the rear. The systematic destruction of NBIS Island's defensive network began at 09 Grr as Harris's Marines turned their attention to the formidable fortifications Major General Imamura had spent weeks constructing. The coastal pillboxes, designed for the mass annihilation of Marines crossing the causeway, now found themselves under attack from their undefended rear approaches. Their thick concrete walls and steel reinforcement proved useless against adversaries who had already completely bypassed the killing zone. Stout's company advanced through the defensive positions like a demolition brigade. Each bunker presented the same tactical problem, for which the same destructive solution had already been found. The Japanese had constructed their fortifications to withstand a frontal assault from the sea, with thick concrete facing the coast and interlocking fields of fire covering every approach from obvious landing zones. However, the rear entrances were only protected by camouflaged steel doors designed to prevent infiltrators rather than repel organized infantry attacks. The first major stronghold fell in a coordinated assault that served as a blueprint for all subsequent attacks. While one squad provided cover, suppressing any Japanese attempts to reinforce the position, Macaulay's flamethrower team approached the bunker from its blind side. The portable flamethrowers hissed, spewing jets of jellied gasoline through ventilation slits and firing ports, filling the concrete chamber with superheated gases that rendered the position uninhabitable in seconds. When the steel door finally opened, the surviving defenders stumbled out with raised hands, their uniforms scorched, and their weapons abandoned in the raging inferno behind them. A bunker designed to hold an entire Marine battalion for hours was neutralized by a four-man team in less than 10 minutes. The tactical advantage of attacking from an unexpected direction transformed what should have been a multi-hour battle into a series of swift, one-sided engagements. Private First Class Ishida found himself trapped in a mortar position, which had been placed to shell Marines attempting to cross the causeway. The circular concrete structure was built with a narrow entrance facing inland, away from the expected direction of attack. But this very entrance now provided easy access for American forces who had already breached the defensive perimeter. The mortar itself was a Type 97, capable of delivering 80 mm rounds with devastating accuracy, but its fixed position meant it could only hit targets in predetermined areas that the Marines had already bypassed. The sound of approaching footsteps on the coral grit told Ishida his position had been discovered. Through a narrow firing slit, he saw American soldiers moving across terrain that, according to plan, should have been occupied by Japanese reserves. The defensive plan called for these reserves to counterattack any American forces that managed to establish a beachhead, driving them back into the sea before they could consolidate their positions. Instead, the reserves were scattered and destroyed piecemeal, caught off guard by an assault that materialized from an impossible direction. Have you ever felt that, despite all your careful calculations and months of painstaking preparation, fate suddenly deals you such a blow that all your efforts seem in vain? Imagine, you built impregnable bastions, designed every detail, were confident in your invincibility. But at the crucial moment, everything collapses because the enemy simply refuses to follow your rules of the game. Familiar, isn't it? This feeling of hopelessness, when a perfect plan turns into a trap, is familiar to many. But what if I told you that precisely such a situation became the key to an unexpected victory, and that even the most powerful fortifications can be doomed if their creators fail to consider one critical factor? Today, we will delve into a story that will completely revolutionize your understanding of tactics and strategy, showing how a single oversight can predetermine the outcome of an entire battle. This is not just a war story. It's a lesson on the importance of looking at the world from different angles. It was precisely in such a trap that Ishida found himself. When the flamethrower team reached his shelter, the lieutenant made a decision that hundreds of his comrades had faced before him. Surrender promised life, but at the same time, it was a bitter admission that a seemingly flawless defensive plan had been completely outmaneuvered by enemy forces, who refused to follow the expected scenario. The concrete walls, which had provided so much confidence during weeks of preparation, now became a deadly trap, locking him in a position that had lost all tactical value. The sharp hiss as the flamethrower's fuel ignited the air inside the mortar pit was audible 50 yards away. Ishida stumbled, rushing towards the exit, his rifle forgotten, his hands already raised above his head as he emerged into the sunlight, which seemed unimaginably bright after the pitch darkness of the burning shelter. Another position fell. Another fragment of Imamura's defensive network was destroyed, and the methodical destruction of NBIS Island continued with relentless efficiency. Stay with us until the end to fully immerse yourself in this incredible story. We would be especially grateful for your like and subscription, and of course, don't forget to write in the comments where you are watching this video from. We greatly appreciate your activity and want to know who our audience is. By 10 o'clock that morning, Harris had already reorganized his battalion for the final phase of the assault. The southeastern beaches now served as a reliable supply line, with additional landing vehicle tracked LVT delivering ammunition, medical supplies, and reinforcements across a 2-mile stretch of open water that had seemed so insurmountable during initial planning. What was initially perceived as a major disadvantage, the long, open approach from the sea, had turned into a strategic advantage, allowing the Marines to sustain their operations without relying on the contested causeway. This unexpected turn of events only underscored how unpredictable fate can be on the battlefield. However, despite the successes, the last organized pockets of resistance on the island awaited the Americans along the northwest coast. It was here that the very bunkers and gun positions were located, specifically built to control approaches from Peleliu. Powerful guns were meant to turn the causeway into a veritable kill zone for any American forces attempting to cross it. Their massive concrete walls faced the sea, and firing ports provided ideal fields of fire across the narrow strait. Underground casemates contained enough ammunition to withstand weeks of defensive fighting. But, as is often the case in military conflicts, they were all deployed in the wrong direction. This was a fatal error that the Marines were about to exploit ruthlessly. The Marines approached from land, moving through coconut groves and coral formations that provided natural cover, until they were close enough to use demolition charges and flamethrowers against the unprotected rear entrances. Each fallen position opened new paths for assault teams, creating a domino effect that accelerated as the morning offensive progressed. The largest bunker complex housed a 96th Coastal Defense gun, designed to engage American warships attempting to provide fire support for amphibious operations. This weapon could fire a 150mm shell with such accuracy that it could damage or sink cruisers over 10 miles away, posing a significant threat to naval forces supporting the marine assault. If you're still with us, then this story has truly captivated you. Don't forget to like, subscribe to the channel, and be sure to write in the comments from which corner of the world you are watching this video. Your support helps us create even more engaging content. Its concrete fortification was built to withstand direct hits from battleship guns, with walls 4 feet thick and a steel-reinforced roof capable of deflecting even 16-inch shells. The gun crew inside the bunker had trained for months to hit surface targets approaching from the sea. They knew the distances to every prominent land feature, could calculate firing solutions for moving targets, and maintain accurate fire even under the heaviest counter-barrage. What they never practiced was defending their position against an infantry assault from land, because such an attack was considered impossible, given the defensive structures that were supposed to protect the island's interior. Thus, seemingly insurmountable power proved helpless against an unexpected approach. When Macaulay's squad reached the bunker's rear entrance, they found a steel door designed to protect against saboteurs, not combat engineers with shaped charges. The explosion tore the door from its hinges and sent shock waves through the concrete chamber that left the gun crew stunned and disoriented. Within minutes, the most powerful weapon on Ngacibas Island was suppressed by a handful of Marines who had approached from a direction the defensive planners had never seriously considered. The systematic destruction of each position created a tactical momentum that became unstoppable as the Japanese defensive network crumbled from within. But even when it seemed all was lost, the cornered enemy was ready for a final, desperate lunge that could change the course of the entire battle. The final Japanese counterattack began at 11:30 a.m. when the remaining elements of Major General Imamura's garrison attempted to recapture the central ridge that controlled access to their remaining positions. The attack was launched simultaneously from 3 directions, coordinated by junior officers who managed to maintain radio contact despite the destruction of the main command bunker. This represented the last organized resistance the defenders could offer, a desperate attempt to turn the tactical situation around before the Marines could complete the methodical destruction of the island's defenses. It was a risky gambit that would either save them or lead to complete collapse. Private First Class Ishida found himself part of a hastily assembled force that included survivors from coastal bunkers, reserve troops caught off guard in their barracks by the sudden attack, and even cooks and clerks who had to be pressed into service as riflemen. The plan was simple in its desperation: assault the open ground towards American positions, breach their perimeter, and retake the high ground that would allow remaining heavy guns to shell the Marine beachhead. Success would restore the defensive network and trap American forces between the sea and revived Japanese positions. Failure would mean the complete collapse of organized resistance on Ngacibas Island. But even in this seemingly hopeless situation, the terrain could play into the defenders' hands. In this final battle, the terrain favored the defenders. The central ridge was riddled with natural coral caves and man-made tunnels that provided hidden routes between positions, allowing small groups of Japanese soldiers to approach within grenade-throwing distance of Marine trenches. These underground passages had been dug over weeks of preparation, creating a network of hidden positions that could support each other even when surface structures were destroyed. The Americans would have to root out each cave individually, using flamethrowers and demolition charges in close quarters combat, which would negate their advantages in firepower and mobility. This promised to be the bloodiest and most grueling phase of the battle. Imagine a situation where everything is against you, when the enemy has built an impregnable fortress designed specifically for your destruction and awaits your every move. What if you knew that inevitable doom awaited you, as every step led into a trap? How can you turn the tide when everything portends not just defeat, but complete annihilation? For it was precisely this desperate reality that American Marines landing on Ngacibas faced. Yet they managed not just to survive, but to completely reverse the situation, turning the enemy's trap into their own snare. This is a story of a battle where despair and doom gave way to incredible ingenuity and courage. Today we will reveal how, against all expectations and the enemy's meticulously planned defense, a victory was achieved that rewrote the rules of amphibious landings. You will learn how unexpected tactical decisions can change the outcome of any, even the most hopeless, engagement, and how conventional approaches can prove fatal for those who employ them. We will show that even in situations where everything seems predetermined, there is always a path to triumph. Stay with us and watch until the end to learn all the details of this amazing story. We would be especially grateful for your like and subscription. And of course, don't forget to write in the comments where you are watching this video from. In the shell-pocked depressions that stretched near the ridge's summit, Sergeant Macaulay's squad established a position with an excellent view of approaches from the north and west. By this point, the Marines had learned to recognize subtle signs indicating Japanese tunneling, barely perceptible depressions in the coral surface, areas of discolored vegetation, ventilation shafts, cleverly disguised as natural formations. Each cave mouth represented a potential source of enemy fire, requiring constant vigilance and immediate response to any detected movement. The very first indication of the counterattack came from Macaulay's tripwires strung along the most likely approaches. Thin steel cables, salvaged from destroyed Japanese communication equipment, remained invisible in the morning shadows, but made distinctive sounds when brushed by advancing troops. The sergeant heard the characteristic ping of a broken wire from 3 different directions within just 30 seconds, confirming that the enemy was launching a coordinated assault, not isolated infiltration attempts that had characterized the preceding hours of fighting. Stay with us and watch until the end to fully immerse yourself in this incredible story. We would be especially grateful for your like and subscription. And of course, write in the comments where you are watching this video from. The coordination of the Marine counter-response was handled by Captain Stout from his command post, located in a captured Japanese bunker. To maintain communication with his scattered platoon, he used the very same underground telephone lines that had previously connected the enemy's defensive network. The irony of the situation was not lost on him. American forces were now using Japanese infrastructure to defend against Japanese attacks, so completely reversing the tactical situation that the original defensive plan had become a liability for its creators. The fiercest fighting erupted around a complex of interconnected caves where the remnants of a Japanese machine gun company were sheltering. Type 96 light machine guns had been repositioned to fire from concealed positions within the coral formations. Their muzzle flashes were invisible to surface observers, but their flanking fire was deadly to anyone attempting to cross the open areas between Marine positions. Each such weapon was supported by riflemen armed with Type 38 bolt-action rifles, creating interlocking fields of fire that turned any advance into a carefully calculated risk. Harris moved between his company's positions, assessing the tactical situation and making decisions that would determine whether the counterattack could be repelled or if it would force his Marines to surrender hard-won ground. The Japanese assault proved more organized than he had expected, indicating that enemy commanders had managed to retain some degree of control despite the destruction of their communication network. Individual acts of bravery were coordinated into coherent tactical movements, turning what should have been a desperate last stand into a real threat to the American position. The turning point came when a Marine flamethrower team, despite heavy fire from Japanese machine gun positions, managed to reach the entrance of the main cave complex. The portable flamethrower was designed specifically for this type of close-quarters combat. Its charge of jellied gasoline capable of penetrating confined spaces where conventional explosives would be ineffective. The operator, a corporal from Kansas, whose steady hands had already cleared dozens of bunkers that morning, approached the cave mouth with the methodical precision of a master craftsman, applying a familiar tool to a well-understood problem. The very first stream of flame illuminated the interior of the cave system, revealing the extent of the Japanese positions and the number of defenders who had taken refuge in the coral passages. Superheated gases filled every chamber and tunnel, creating an environment that instantly became lethal to anyone remaining underground. Within minutes, organized resistance from the cave complex was completely suppressed, thereby eliminating a key foothold for the entire Japanese defensive line. Ashida emerged from a secondary tunnel 50 yards from the main cave entrance, his uniform scorched and his rifle lost somewhere in the smoke-filled passages behind him. The retreat turned into a rout as surviving Japanese soldiers abandoned their positions and fled towards the northern tip of the island, where a few scattered bunkers still gave the illusion of defensive strength. The counterattack had completely failed, expending the last reserves of organized resistance in a futile attempt to change a tactical situation that had been hopeless since the Marines landed on the wrong beaches. By 12 p.m., the systematic destruction of Japanese positions resumed with mechanical efficiency. Each remaining bunker was isolated, surrounded, and destroyed using the same methods that had proven effective throughout the morning. Flamethrowers cleared interiors, demolition charges collapsed concrete structures, and rifle fire eliminated any defenders attempting to escape. The perfect kill zone that Major General Imamura had designed to annihilate an entire Marine battalion had been turned inside out, becoming a trap for its creators rather than their enemies. The final outcome of the counterattack was reflected in numbers that demonstrated a complete shift in the tactical situation. 470 Japanese soldiers killed or captured against 15 killed and 33 wounded Marines. The mathematics of amphibious warfare had been rewritten by a commander who refused to follow the obvious plan. The silence that settled over NBIS Island at 1 p.m. on September 29th carried a weight that spoke louder than the morning's cannonade. Colonel Harris stood amidst the wreckage of what was once Major General Imamura's perfect defensive network, surveying concrete bunkers reduced to ruins and firing positions that would never again threaten American forces attempting to cross the narrow causeway. The transformation was complete. A fortress that had taken weeks to build and fortify was dismantled in less than 6 hours by Marines, who refused to attack it the way its builders had expected. Do you think you know what true failure looks like? Does it seem like all your efforts are in vain because you're following rules that are long outdated? What if we told you that your adherence to proven methods is precisely what's leading you to defeat? You're making this mistake with every step you take, yet you don't notice it, and it's causing you to lose far more than you can imagine. Forget everything you've been taught. It might just be a lie. Once upon a time, on a tiny Pacific atoll, a battle occurred that redefined all notions of warfare. Those who built the fortifications expected one outcome, but received something entirely different. The repercussions of this engagement extended far beyond the coral beaches, altering the very doctrine of amphibious operations. A commander named Harris demonstrated that traditional assault methods could be rewritten by abandoning predictable approaches in favor of innovative thinking. The conventional solution for Yasabis Island would have involved a frontal assault across the causeway, supported by massive naval bombardment and preceded by multi-day airstrikes designed to weaken defensive positions. Such an assault would undoubtedly have succeeded, but the cost would have been measured in hundreds of American lives and weeks of fierce fighting. Instead, the Marines achieved a complete victory in 48 hours, incurring losses barely noticeable against the backdrop of operations in the Pacific Theater. 15 killed and 33 wounded were tragic losses for families and units. But this was a mere fraction of what traditional wisdom predicted for assaulting such heavily fortified positions. 470 Japanese defenders were utterly annihilated as an organized fighting force. Their meticulously planned defensive preparations rendered useless against an enemy who approached from a completely unexpected direction. Stay with us and watch until the end. We'd be especially grateful for a like and a subscription. And of course, let us know in the comments where you're watching from. Captain Stout moved through the Central Command Bunker, which had served as Imamura's headquarters during the preparatory phase, examining maps and documents that revealed the meticulous planning invested in fortifying the island. The Japanese had studied American amphibious tactics with the same attention to detail that characterized all their military preparations. They identified the most likely landing zones, calculated optimal placements for their heavy weaponry, and created overlapping fields of fire that would devastate any force attempting the obvious approach. The defensive plan was tactically sound, operationally thorough, and strategically irrelevant. It was designed to counter the tactics of a previous war, not to adapt to the innovative thinking that distinguished the best American commanders. Imamura had prepared his forces for a repeat of the Battle of Tarawa, creating kill zones that would have been devastating against Marines following established doctrine. But Harris had studied the same battles and drew different conclusions about the relationship between tactical surprise and operational success. Sergeant Macaulay oversaw the destruction of remaining Japanese equipment, ensuring that weapons and ammunition that had survived the morning's fighting could not be used by infiltrators or hidden forces. Type 96 machine guns, positioned to rake the causeway, were disassembled into components for shipment back to American intelligence units for technical analysis. A coastal defense gun, capable of threatening cruisers and destroyers, was demolished with shaped charges, leaving its steel barrel twisted and its concrete emplacement cracked beyond repair. The systematic destruction served both practical and psychological purposes. Practically, it ensured that Yasabis Island could never again serve as a base for Japanese operations against American forces in Palau or the surrounding waters. Psychologically, it sent a message to enemy commanders across the Pacific that meticulously planned defensive preparations were no guarantee against innovative American tactics. The ideal kill zone became a perfect example of how rigid thinking could be overcome by flexible execution. Private First Class. Ishida found himself among the Japanese survivors being processed at a temporary prisoner collection point established by the Marines near the southeastern beaches. The irony was undeniable. He was held on the very ground where American forces had landed that morning, beaches that Japanese planners had dismissed as too difficult to assault and too insignificant to heavily fortify. His capture occurred not because he fought poorly, but because the entire defensive concept had been outmaneuvered before the first shot was even fired. The interrogation process revealed how psychologically unprepared the Japanese forces were for a completely different battle. Prisoners consistently described their surprise at being attacked from land rather than sea, their confusion when American naval artillery targeted rear areas instead of coastal positions, and their inability to coordinate an effective response when communications were disrupted by attacks on sites presumed to be safe. The tactical surprise was so complete that many defenders never understood what was happening until their positions were overrun. Intelligence officers documented weapons and equipment that provided insight into Japanese defensive doctrine and technological capabilities. Bunker construction methods demonstrated a sophisticated understanding of how to create positions capable of withstanding heavy bombardment. But they also revealed assumptions about the direction from which attacks would originate. Embrasures faced seaward. Communication lines connected positions along the expected axis of advance, and supply routes were designed to support forces engaged in a prolonged frontal battle, not a mobile defense against multiple directions of attack. Harris submitted his after-action report from the deck of the command ship, while amphibious transports continued to ferry supplies and personnel between the mainland and the newly captured island. The tactical lessons learned at Yasubus would influence amphibious operations throughout the remainder of the Pacific campaign, demonstrating that innovative thinking could achieve decisive results with minimal casualties when applied against enemies who prepared for predictable attacks. The strategic significance extended beyond the immediate tactical victory. Japanese forces across the Pacific had invested immense resources in creating defensive networks based on the assumption that American commanders would follow established amphibious assault doctrine. If these assumptions could be consistently disproven, the entire Japanese defensive strategy would require fundamental reassessment at a time when resources and manpower were already stretched thin. Have you ever wondered why even the most impregnable fortresses sometimes crumble like a house of cards? How could it be that a meticulously planned, seemingly perfect defense turned into a complete collapse for its creators? Perhaps you're accustomed to thinking that the outcome of a battle is decided solely by numbers and firepower, but that's not always the case. In this narrative, we will uncover the secret of how, in just 2 days, one man revolutionized the understanding of warfare, demonstrating that the gravest strategic error is to expect predictable enemy behavior. Prepare to learn that no perfect traps exist if you know how to circumvent them. Stay with us and watch until the end. We'd be especially grateful for a like and a subscription. And of course, let us know in the comments where you're watching from. The dawn that just yesterday promised Japanese forces on Yasubus only confidence in the impregnability of their fortifications now illuminated an entirely different picture. The rays of the rising sun breaking through the morning haze no longer caressed the defensive ramparts of the Japanese bastion erected on Yasubus Island. Instead, they picked out American positions from the shadows, positions that now dominated every approach to the island. What was conceived as a flawless kill zone, designed to grind down attacking forces, turned into a prime example of how genuine tactical ingenuity can completely rewrite the established rules of engagement. That very narrow causeway, which Japanese command strategists had expected to use to funnel Marines directly into deadly crossfire, now served as an uninterrupted supply route for American units. These forces, demonstrating unprecedented ingenuity, completely bypassed the meticulously laid trap, turning it against its very creators. In less than 48 hours, Colonel Harris graphically proved to the world that the most dangerous adversary to any defensive plan, no matter how elaborate, is an attacking force that categorically refuses to act according to a preconceived scenario. Stay with us and watch until the end. We'd be especially grateful for a like and a subscription. And of course, let us know in the comments where you're watching from.